Oh, I tell you what, if that doesn't get us subscribers, Ash,
It needs to, yeah.
doesn't look. You see, that's why you subscribe to this channel. Forget the middle-aged white dudes just talking bollocks. Look at how cute. Look how cute that is.
Look at that handsome little face, yeah.
Oh, you can see why he took over Gotham, can't you?
Definitely, yeah. He's he was and still is quite a powerful little fella, yes.
You can see that. You can see he's sitting there going, I may look small, but the hounds of hell. I have chased down many a blues artist that has sold his soul and tried to renegade on the deal. That's
yes. Full hero, yeah. And he's probably going to be making it awkward for me to type or communicate properly, but I will try my best.
Talking is what it's all about, isn't it? We don't type.
So what did you think to it?
Do the synopsis.
The synopsis, right. So, good evening, ladies and reader. This week, Colin and I have both been reading Pigeons from Hell by Robert E. Howard. To give a synopsis, which includes spoilers, two New Englanders, John Branner and his friend Griswell, travel in the south and spend the night in a deserted plantation mansion. Griswell awakens from a dream of a yellow-faced creature looking at him. He sees Branner walk up the stairs in a trance. He's horrified when Branner returns as an animated corpse, gripping the bloody axe that had split his skull. Griswell flees into the woods. In his flight, he meets the county sheriff, Buckner, Bucky to his friends, who investigates the house and finds Branner motionless on the floor. Griswell is implicated in his friend's murder, but the sheriff gives him the benefit of the doubt and tries to clear him. Bucky gives some credence to Griswell's bizarre tale due to the manor's ominous reputation. It was Blassonville's residents, family from the West Indies, who were known for their cruelty. After the American Civil War, the Blassonvilles fell into poverty, with all their menfolk dead and only 4 sisters remaining, shortly to be joined by their Aunt Celia from the West Indies and her mulatto maid, Joan. Celia mistreated Joan, and when the latter disappeared, it was thought she had run away. Soon after, Celia vanished as well, and it was thought that she had returned to the West Indies. Over the next months, 3 of the Blassonville sisters also vanished, one by one. One night in 1890, the last of the Blassonvilles, Elizabeth, fled the house, claiming she had found her sisters' corpses in a secret room and that she'd been attacked by the shape of a woman with a yellow face. She left for California and never returned. The manor has lain deserted since, and the local black folk shun it. The eponymous pigeons sometimes flock about the decaying manor, and legend has it that they are the Blassonville's souls. So the following evening, Bucky and Griswell visit the hut of an ancient voodoo man, Jacob, seeking information about the house and the Blassonvilles. Jacob tells of the extinct family and of Celia Blassonville, who mistreated her mulatto maid, Joan. He claims to be a maker of Zuvembis, but he insists he cannot talk about them to a white man without Dambala sending a snake with a white crescent moon on its head to kill him. But he drifts into senility and rambles about voodoo, the god Dambala, and about zombies and their female counterparts, Zuvembis, who live only to kill and have no sense of time, possess hypnotic powers, and who can live indefinitely unless wounded by steel or lead. Finally, he tells how she participated in voodoo. Reaching for firewood, Jacob is bitten by a venomous snake, meeting the fate he feared. Bucky and Griswell conclude that Joan transformed herself into a Zuvembi to exact vengeance on Celia Blassonville and their nieces. They resolve to spend the night in Blassonville Manor to learn the truth. There they find Elizabeth Blassonville's diary, which tells of her fear that something is in the house with her, has killed her sisters, and will kill her too. That night, while lying awake in the darkness, Griswell hears the same whistling as the previous night, which Elizabeth's diary had also mentioned. Thinking he is fleeing the house, he finds himself climbing the manor stairs against his will. He's confronted by a female apparition with a yellow face and a knife. Griswell is powerless to resist, but Bucky, who has followed him up the stairs, shoots the creature, which flees, mortally wounded. They track its dying noises to the secret room, where they find the hanging bodies of the 3 missing Blassonville sisters, as well as the corpse of the Zuvembi, which is still dressed in a ball gown. Bucky recognises the face of the Zvemby from a portrait he's seen. It is Celia Blassonville. The maid, Joan, in revenge, gave the black brew she got from Jacob to her mistress and fled. Celia Blassonville transformed into a Zvemby, killed 3 of her nieces, and had been lying in the abandoned manor, killing anyone who entered it at night. Bucky says that the case can be closed by saying that a madwoman had killed Griswold's friend, John Branner, since nobody will believe the truth of the matter.
You see, listeners, you get a much better synopsis when Ash does it than when I do it. What do you think of that, Oswald?
He's not impressed. Zvembies scare him, yeah. I don't know if there's a dog version of zombies. Would that be the canine zombies? Or
I would have called them zogbies myself.
That would work as well, yes.
Zogbies. Go on then, ask me the question.
How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood?
Very, very good. And I'll show my geek credentials and say that was actually in Blake 7 and used to confuse a master computer that was trying to take over the ship.
Wow. Another reason why I'm glad that I avoided Blake 7.
Oh.
So the question is, what, darling? What? The question is, what did you think to it?
What did I think to it?
Yeah.
I thought it was absolutely fucking amazing, to be honest.
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of those really weird ones where I read it, thought I have never read this before, because sometimes I read some of these old ones and I have read them, I just didn't know what they were called. This one, I had no idea. I have lots of a lot of things to talk about it. And I loved it. I actually did it. I was running out of time this weekend because, as you know, we've got busy projects on. So I listened to it and I managed to find a recording where the guy did the voices absolutely spot on. So Bucky, who tells quite a lot of the story, is told through Bucky. And he's talking like this. As he's talking about the house. And I know this black fella who, who's... Because it was in there are knowledges Jacob, that black folk have that white folk have never known. It was just brilliant and so of its time and really, really fantastic. And you'd never think, apart from the amount of times they mention Negroids, you probably would be hard pressed to say that was written in 1938.
It's come from the same fellow who gave us Conan the Barbarian and Col and Solomon Kane. So he's a writer who knows how to entertain his audience. And I think for any writer who knows how to please an audience, there's a relative sense of timelessness. Or is that me just being arty and farty there?
No, I don't think it's just that, because I think when we read Jekyll and Hyde, for example, I don't think that felt modern. That didn't feel like it was written by a modern writer. However, it's a brilliant tale, and therefore the story is timeless, but the actual writing wasn't. This one, I think if you didn't know it was written in 1938, and seriously, it was just basically the racial language, which you could almost argue someone wrote in a retro way in order to be authentic. It has all the structure of a very modern tale. And the way that it presents it, I know it's got the 3 parts, which is how most tales written at that time were done. But I thought the way the characters came across and everything like that, it almost felt like, and it was actually written in retro, funny enough, because it's about 1890, isn't it? Oh, no, it's set in 1938, but they talk about 1890.
Yeah, they talk about the American Civil War and then them staying in the house until the 1890s, Yeah,
so it kind of has that feel to it where it is looking back in that historical way, but the way it does it, and it just kind of mixes. It's like one of those moments where I'm going to do the arty-farty thing now. When you look at the move between the Romantic poets going into the modernists, and you see the way it changes slightly as it goes along. There's bits held over from the old school, and you can see where it's coming to the new school. I think it feels like one of those bridge pieces where you really have a certain amount of structure from the old school, but the way the language that he uses is very much more modern in what he's saying, and it gels so well. And I just honestly, I thought it was a hoot.
I thought it got an awful lot of really good things going for it. I like the pacing of it. I like the fact that it starts off and you're immediately in the story. I like the fact. I love the fact that it's called Pigeons from Hell, which would be so off-putting to most people.
I'm going to come back to that, actually, the Pigeons from Hell. We'll come back to that title. But yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. Great title.
What, you wanted to get off my knee? What? Right, you can get off my knee then. Right, sweaty dog is off my knee now.
Okay, so no more putting the camera down to the crotch, okay? There's no dog there. We don't want to see it.
All right, yeah. You say that now, but the recording's off. Title, absolutely brilliant. The pacing on it was absolutely brilliant. The fact that we've got Cowboy in there, it's just... you've got Cowboy.
He's the sheriff. Yeah, he's brilliant.
There's an undercurrent of racism in there, but I think that's something that you'd notice more from post-colonial studies rather than the overt racism.
Yes. It's very, very much the language used in the area. It has historical and geographical context for the way that language is used. And I actually thought it was not as racist as some of the stuff that I've read, because it wasn't being completely derogatory. It was actually having a really big go at the slavers and the plantation owners.
It was. Yeah. But I suppose my worry was that in reading it, they were saying, imagine the cruelty that you would get undiluted in the West Indies. As though, they're going to be cruel out there, whereas when we import slaves over here, we're not quite as cruel to them,
well, there was that whole thing, wasn't there, with the Creoles? Because I've recently read Wide Sargassum Sea, which is a post-colonial take on Jane Eyre. And it did actually go into the West Indies. It actually talks about the West Indies and how basically you had the indigenous population there of the actual West, what we now call the West Indians. I don't know what they would call themselves. I don't know what the people who live there call their islands. And then you had the white slavers that came in, and the black slavers as well that came in. And the West Indies were kind of used as a trading post to send them on to America. And you ended up with this I'm going to say breed. I'm going to, in the terms of breeding, as in like class system. So you had this class of people that were neither the indigenous black population of the West Indies nor the white slavers on the other side, and they were hated by everybody. And and there was a lot of that kind of thing of how cruelly they were treated within the West Indies when they brought the slaves into that area, but how cruelly they were treated by the people that lived there as well. It's quite interesting. Like I say, you mentioned post-colonialism, and it's something I'm doing a bit of at the moment, doing a bit of reading of that, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Jane Eyre, actually, because it's a book that I despise for its major plot hole. In the fact that page 1, here's Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is an orphan. And then when she gets a little bit cheesed off that Mr. Rochester's got more wives than he should have at a wedding, she runs away, and the first house she bumps into, she's got family living there.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a fucking orphan in my book, all right? Yeah. I've read lots of things about orphans, and they don't just go running to random houses and finding relatives. That's not the way it works.
But it was, to be honest, a very Victorian thing to do, to be honest with you. It was a very Victorian thing. Often in Victorian times, orphans would run off and find family somewhere, I think Dickens had a few of them as well, didn't he? Don't do the Dickens joke, Ashley. We got told off in the comments. No, we're resisting the Dickens joke this
year. So, not going to do any Dickens jokes, No.
I might do a H.P. Lovecraft joke.
He was actually a friend of H.P. Lovecraft. They communicated quite a lot. They both wrote for Weird Tales, which I think is why it's easy to sort of like see echoes of H.P. Lovecraft's racism in his writing. But as you say, it's not so much racism, it's more that it's geographical and it's to that time period.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like I say, it's within H.P. Lovecraft, when he was talking of, and please excuse the language I'm using, but I really don't, I think it's important that we use genuine language and things. When they're talking about the Negroids within the story, in the H.P. Lovecraft, he uses it in a very derogatory way. He's talking about them as being like Aquarius sailors, where in this one, it is more just language where he's being used. And there was a big thing as well, which I noticed when he said this black man came into town, and actually using that description as opposed to being coloured folk or being, all the other terms that were used at the time. It was very, very descriptive terms rather than derogatory terms, which I noticed, quite a lot when I was, because you kind of prepare yourself, don't you, for racism and sexism when you're dealing with stuff this age. And it was one of those,
and also, I think the genre itself lends itself to it. When you're looking at adventure stories or you're looking at horror stories, in that case, this whole notion of the other as being from some culture that's not our own personal culture. When you've got old white men writing stories, the things they're scared of are women, they're scared of people of colour, scared of people with a different religion. Yeah. So, we're bound to get all of these anomalies cropping up within fiction as people, put their own prejudices into stories, as in, well, you're scared of spiders, well, you should be scared of this one because it's a black spider, and we know they're worst of all. Yeah. Well, it's a
black woman spider as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's got a different religion to us. Yeah.
It's a black woman Islamic spider.
Yeah. Which is the worst kind of spider, in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's gay. But and in this one, that's why I said it feels more like a modern piece, because it feels like it's being told historically as opposed to being contemporary of its time in that way. And so that's why I thought you could easily not know when it was published. It's got atmosphere in there, and it also reads in that first part like a murder mystery story. Bucky goes in there to try and solve a crime. He's sort of like got a dead body and he's sort of like piecing it together. Oh, I love that. Yeah, when he's coming up with all the theories. Well, you just dragged the body in here, but then you got no blood on you. Is that really, really nicely done? Really nice. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And with all that being done through dialogue as well, I thought that was really quite effective. It gave us such a strong sense of who they were. With Jacob going a little bit batty when he's talking about the voodoo rituals and then getting, just as he's about to tell him that it was, who it was, getting bitten. I thought that was a lovely cliffhangery type piece of writing.
Well, it reminded me of Angel Heart.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember the original book, because there's a film called Angel Heart. And then the original book, which I think is called Dark Angel, because there's a moment of it. What I thought was, again, going back to the time when it was written, they knew about voodoo back then, but it was very much Haiti. It was very much African religions and all that kind of stuff. And placing it in America gave it a location that you wouldn't at that time normally have found it. And it put me in mind of that, because the book of Angel Heart, and I'm going to have to look it up in a second, it's annoying because it's going to annoy me, is it's in New York, but it's all voodoo rituals going on in New York and in apartments. And now in the modern world, with all the films that we've had like Devil's Advocate and things like that, we're used to seeing voodoo used as a religion within a modern setting. You might have a Haitian witch doctor who is living within a Haitian community in Chicago, for example. So you see that. But back then, when it was America, it was coming out of its civil war, it was still being itself. The idea of an external religion being, practiced on their soil. Even before Mississippi had grown up to be, that kind of voodoo capital with all the blues. That was about 1930. That would have been the 1930s. So it would have been about this time when that was being recorded, but wouldn't have been very well known across the whole of the country. So yeah, it's a brilliant thing to bring into it. This kind of like counterculture, I suppose, is the best way of putting it.
Yeah, it's almost as though we could say Live and Let Die has been influenced by this. Apparently in Latin, the title to this story is Columbae ex Infernis.
And it did remind me of Columbo as well, now you come to mention it.
Yes. But yeah, I suppose, this whole notion of pigeons from hell, I do like the idea that's sort of like expressed throughout the story, that the pigeons are actually the souls of people from hell that you can sort of like see in this house, because this house is a portal to hell. And it just means that every time I now see one of the pigeon houses that I sometimes walk past, I'm going to be thinking those pigeons have come directly from hell. I thought of it today, actually. I was in Manchester for a brief period today, and I was just around the corner from Pigeon Street. There's an actual street called Pigeon Street. So, of course, my brain is immediately going there. And I turned around at this old abandoned factory building with broken windows, and sat in one of the broken windows was a pigeon looking out of it. It just had the slant of glass, just carry it in one corner, and it was sat in the other corner. So you had it's brilliant. It's fun. It was like, I've got to get out of here. It works. It's just something that's so.
But the title, see, I think that's a really interesting thing. I think it has a completely different connotation in the UK and now than it did back then in the US. Because over here, we've always had Trafalgar Square. So pigeons. We have a history of pigeon keeping and pigeon fanciers, and we have Trafalgar Square. So we have these areas where there are lots of pigeons, and they've always, for a very long time, basically been seen as flying rats, and and vermin, because there's so many of them. Where in America, in the deep South, the concept of seeing pigeons was a bit out there. It was a bit different, and something like that. So the title "Pigeons from Hell" to us in the UK seems really funny. As this kind of idea is, they're just pigeons. How can you have pigeons? Monster pigeons. When you read the story, you actually realise that it's a really very clever title.
Yeah, it's quite a good piece of work, actually. I think one of the things that I like is our first victim gets killed by an axe, which is just such a great horror story way of murdering somebody.
And the description of the body when he's searching it, and the way that he describes the wound is absolutely fantastic, and it's gruesome, very, very gruesome as well. Again, very modern. It's very modern in the way that it does things. It's when you read other weird tales, they kind of try and metaphor or purple around the gore, where he's just straight in, blood all over the place, chasm in his head,
bit of brains somewhere,
brains and blood on the axe hand, on the actual blade,
which it works. I think if I wasn't a massive Robert E. Howard fan before, I would have been after reading this one, because it's just got so much fun within it.
Absolutely. But also it's not just fun, as we've been doing, because this is the great thing in what we've been doing, because we've been talking about various things. So as we've looked at stuff that's much slower moving than this, because this really does just drop you right in the middle of the action very, very quickly. Ones that are slower, and we start looking at the mechanics of it and how you can use that and how you cannot use that and all that kind of stuff. I think looking at this from a creative point of view as well, it's very easy to write something like this off as just pulp.
Yeah,
very easy. But the crafting that goes into it, what he's done, and the callbacks all the way through, the yellow face and all that, even to the twist at the end, where it completely convinces you that it is Joan, and then you find out it wasn't Joan. Joan created a new word for me, Zuzembe, which I didn't know, and I've read a lot about voodoo, and I didn't know that term.
We're going to have to start using it. Whenever I'm watching a zombie film, if somebody's sort of like saying, "Oh, there's zombies there," I'm going to point to him and say, "Well, actually, that one's Zavembe because female, and the female of the species is more Zavembe than the male,
It certainly is, and I love that description. They are unaware of time.
Yes.
What a great way of stating that something's immortal. It doesn't know it's supposed to die because it's unaware that time is passing.
It's kind of lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've got notes here that let's see. So it's a story that's confronting the terrible legacy of slavery in the United States, the aftermaths of decades of Jim Crow racism and oppression, and somebody suggesting that Howard's motivation could be that he was simply trying to bring to life the type of story that his grandmother used to tell him.
Maybe.
Which,
maybe. I don't know. I mean, it seems as good as any. I mean, it's classic. It's got the old spooky house, a la House of Usher, or The Haunting of Hill House. That's or the one that we read last week, the old nursery story, big old manor house. It's done all that. But in America,
massive organ in it.
Massive organ in it. How long did we last this time? But it just doesn't work anymore.
There's tablets for that.
Well, you've got these big spooky houses, but this one is a brilliant choice because it is one of the plantation houses, and I've seen one of these type of houses when I've been in Middle America. And you look at it, and it was still lived in. It was lived in by a rich family, but it's one of those. It has an extra ambience because the history.
Yeah.
And so where we've got old houses that may be 300 years old, and that there has been brains and blood spread all over those walls at some point in the past, you get that ambience. America, the New England mansions that get used don't quite cut it as much. I mean, House of Usher is the closest that you get to that kind of thing. But even then, there's kind of modern sort of ilk to it. Where the plantation houses, every single plantation house you see has been built with blood. And and it just adds an extra layer. It's a great scene to set it in, and then build this revenge story on the back of a voodoo story.
And I think I like the fact that it's a revenge story because it's almost as though Howard's acknowledging the fact that vengeance was needed to try and repair some of the wrongs that had been done. And as you say, with it being a plantation house, we know that it's already built on blood and it's built on cruelty as well. And I think blood and cruelty and the history of those things are the things that make horror stories work because, the scary thing would be, it was one of the other horrors that was actually within it as well. The fact that straight away Griswold, Bucky's the hero in this. Yeah. Griswold is just sort of like a central character. And as soon as we meet him, he's faced with the horror of his dead friend has been reanimated and he's trying to kill him. And then when he escapes that, there's still the danger that he's going to get put into jail, maybe face the death sentence. And all of his life has turned to crap now in the space of an evening. Yeah. And it's all relying on Cowboy Bucky to come in there and put things right.
Save the day.
Pretty much. And Bucky's options are sort of like limited to proving that zombies exist or proving that this guy is a killer. Yeah. We know which is going to be the more likely outcome. So,
I loved his reasoning as well. His whole reasoning of if you really were the killer, you wouldn't have come up with such a fanciful, weird tale. You'd have created something much more logical to explain it than this.
Absolutely.
That nobody's going to believe. So therefore, there must be something in it because nobody will believe it. It's that twisting of things. Yeah, really good.
It's an awful lot of fun. I think the pace on it is just so breathtaking. It's almost like a Fast and Furious movie, isn't it? Except good. Yeah.
They have that way. People like them.
Yeah.
I think it's the 3 acts. It's got the wonderful. That's actually 4 acts in a way, isn't it? Because you got Act 1, friend dies, comes back as a zombie. You know, the classic tale of boy loses friend comes back as a zombie and tries to kill boy. Boy then gets accused of his murder by the sheriff, who just happens to be walking through the bayou, right? So you got that as Act 1, and the investigation of the house. Then Act 2 is when they go and see the Jacob. Yeah, I'm rubbish with names, but I see it as a voodoo witch doctor, effectively. And you then start having the exposition as to what the supernatural element is. So you're now fed that piece of information of the supernatural element. Act 3 is the diary, which then gives you the history of the supernatural events and the lead up to the supernatural events. And then Act 4, the discovery of the supernatural being and the room and the twist outcome, which actually shows that it's a revenge killing that is absolutely due. And then some innocent bystanders got killed on the way as well because of what was the hangover from it. But at the end of the day, that you almost feel in a kind of melancholic way that justice was done. I'd
almost forgotten about Branagh sort of like getting it in the head when he hadn't really done anything to deserve it.
Nothing at all.
Apart from stayed in a manor house overnight.
An abandoned manor house with some pigeons in it. And he went to find out who's that whistling upstairs.
Which I suppose is a cautionary tale.
But it also has, that whistling upstairs, it has a very kind of like undercurrent of the sirens about it, doesn't it? You're drawn to the musicality or something, or even though it's not musical, you're still drawn towards it. You're being seduced in by music. Yeah.
It's almost as though some summoning has occurred. So this means that maybe not zombies, but Zevembis can whistle.
Well, that seems to be, the lips aren't completely dry, unlike the zombie variant. But remember, these are voodoo zombies as well. That's a really important point to make. We're throwing words like zombie and Zuvembi around the place, but they are voodoo zombies. They are very different from the zombies that just climb out the ground and walk around a bit.
Well, none of them just climb out. I mean, sometimes they've been reanimated through rage-infected blood, and sometimes
no. That's bullshit. That's
that's bullshit. But voodoo zombies
are bullshit. Rage-infected monkeys going out biting people and turning them into chaos demons. No.
That was 28 days later, wasn't it? Or
it was, which I like to call 28 minutes later, because the first 28 minutes are outstanding, and then it falls apart after that.
It's not one of my favourites, that really. Do you think they're building up to 28 years later or something? Is that why we've not had one?
I hope not.
That'd teach us, wouldn't it?
But so so the difference being is you've got what we call the Romero zombie. So in Night of the Living Dead, 1968, very, very important film for a number of reasons, one of which is somebody who had one job to put a copyright notice on the front of the film didn't do it, and therefore it immediately went into public domain. Which is why there's a billion copies of it out there, different people. That was the first time the Dead just got out of the ground for no other reason than they just wanted to.
Right.
So prior to that, everything. I Walked with a Zombie, White Zombie, I Married a Zombie, all those previous horror films from that are all voodoo zombies, which is apparently the reanimation of a corpse, but controlled by a voodoo witch doctor. So they are not just a reanimated corpse. And like with this one, the Zuvembi it's a drink she has to take, and it's the drink that turns her into this. It's not a ritual that, it's not a chemical spill. It's not a government conspiracy. You know, it's not a dried up thing in Las Vegas. It's an actual piece of magic that has created. That's the idea of it. Is it's magic. It's voodoo magic that has reanimated them. Usually, zombies were always brought back in order to do manual labor as well. So they were always kind of to go and dig in a mine because they didn't question anything. They were just automaton, effectively. So it sits within that history of the zombie really well. But I think it actually had. I think this story probably had an influence on George Romero. I really do.
I just want to go back to something you said. Well, I want to chat more about George Romero in a moment. But you're saying that it's voodoo magic that's contained within the drink. Now, to my mind, when I was reading it, I was thinking that the drink actually contains various chemicals and herbs and substances that could potentially put somebody in a fugue state.
Yes.
And they can be controlled in that fugue state. Is that still magic, or has that suddenly become chemical and therefore it's science fiction?
Reality versus fable, isn't it, at that point? It's like there's a powder that the voodoo witch doctors used to use. Again, off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of it. It's worth looking up. It's created from this flower that is found in Haiti. And they created a powder of it, and you blow it into someone's face, and it can create a seizure immediately, and they can fall to the ground, and they can be unresponsive and look dead.
Right.
At which point the voodoo witch doctor used to take them away, bury them 6 inches under the ground, and then take them out later in hypnotic state and put them to work, which is where a lot of the idea of where the zombie comes from. So, yes, I mean, a lot of magic in terms of things like voodoo, or if you're looking at things like the devil worship type magic, the Wicca type magic that we have over here, it's very potion based. So you're infusing bits of nature with laws and knowledges beyond that of most mortal man to create these substances that these people take on. So reality, it's probably a various number of drugs, a couple of certain types of mushroom makes someone pliable, and therefore that's where the myth comes from. But remember, this is not just a myth. This is something that doesn't recognize time. This is something that has been there for 40 years or so.
I mean, this is one of the things that really excites me about stories like this. The fact that we've got this overlap between what's actually possible and what's impossible.
Yeah.
And the fact that there are chemicals out there, there are ways of perhaps not hypnotizing, but maybe suggesting things to people that can put them into one of these states. It's almost as though there is an aspect of reality to the unreality, which is something, that makes the story all the more powerful.
Well, it ties in with a lot of thinking nowadays, which is where it is really interesting in that they talk about old religions being old science in a way, that it was just a way of explaining stuff going on around without having the knowledges that we have now. So why does the sun come up, for example, to use the metaphor? So you've got to try and explain this. And if you, in a very early mind, something is making it come up. Therefore, you get this idea of the God. And as you get forward and Galileo looks out towards the stars and realizes that, no, the earth is revolving around the sun, you then start seeing more of the reality of things. And I think there's a lot of magic is like that. A lot of the myths of magic and the witches and all that, they were making brews for people that changed, that altered people's states, that altered people's consciousness. And that's where we get a lot of the magic mythos from, that then ports over into stories like this, where you then put that level on a modern take of things, and it becomes magic at that point rather than being just chemistry, which is interesting.
And I wonder if they sort of decided to call it magic just to dumb it down for thick readers like myself, so that as I'm reading it, I'm not there thinking, oh, well, how does this work? Or
you call it magic because that's what makes it mystical. Otherwise, it is just a murder mystery. It has an element of the unknown about it. As soon as you add the word magic to it, it has an element of the unknown. Not a lot, but it does have some. And I think that's where it really comes in, because it makes things mystical as soon as you start adding that to it.
I think you're right, and I think this ties in with your stories of Elizabeth, and I've forgotten her surname.
Gaskell.
No, not Elizabeth Gaskell.
Oh, Elizabeth Stead.
Yeah,
Elizabeth Stead.
Yeah, Elizabeth Stead, I've got time for. Elizabeth Gaskell.
Oh, get lost.
But with Elizabeth Stead, you are doing something there where you've got murder mystery investigations with this supernatural aspect to it. Yes. But that supernatural aspect is always going to be sufficiently consistent so that you can make an analysis and a diagnosis of what's occurring through rational means.
Yes.
And yeah, so again, it's this whole rationality. And I suppose it's my worry that the uncanny should be about things that are irrational and unrational, whereas we are looking at the irrational and the unrational in a very rational way.
Yeah, but it allows you to do a fantastic mechanic where you can set it up and go, yes, we're rationalizing this. We're actually going to show you that this is nothing but chemistry and it's just someone in a hypnotic state. And then we're going to show you something that proves it isn't. It's a magic trick at that point. It's an illusion. And it's what the old seance people used to do back in the Victorian times when they were trying to basically con people. But the idea of this is what science says. And look, we can rationalize everything that's gone on just around you by doing this until we do this. And it's that makes everybody go, oh, wow, and changes the whole dynamic on it. If everything was just unnatural, if it was just like, oh, here's a magic potion bubbling away, in a kind of like Harry Potter way, then it's just a potion. It's only ever a potion. It's a love potion and it has an effect. Where if you kind of go, no, the reason is because we're using this flower and this flower, and it has a base in reality, and you think you've got it, but then you find out that actually, hang on a second, you think you got it. Oh, it's just a hypnotic state. Until you find out that woman's been living in that house for the last 40 years in a secret compartment. And, it's all of that last little bit suddenly makes you question whether or not you understand the reality.
So you were saying about George A. Romero.
George A. Romero, yeah. Yeah, I think it was just that the way that this particular zombie has that longevity and the way this particular zombie is particularly vicious, which also does possession as well, which was really weird because it killed and then took over the body to go and kill again.
Yeah.
Right. I wonder, I don't know, I've not read it anywhere, but I wonder if George A. Romero actually had influence of that when he was coming up with his zombies that come out of the ground and are just relentlessly going at you, because that's what makes them scary. It's not fast moving zombies. It's the fact that there are so many and they just won't stop. And there's an element of that in this, that it's in the house, and until it was killed by the policeman, it could have been there for another 300 years, just killing people that randomly slept in that house.
And I think George A. Romero's zombies are very Tribble-like, aren't they? In the fact that, they just keep multiplying and multiplying.
There's a lot of dead people, and then they kill people, and then the people they've killed come back. And yes, there is that multiplication side of things, but it's the not being controlled. So your voodoo zombies are controlled by a witch doctor. This Zuzembe isn't. It's on its own. It does its one thing, but there's nobody pulling its strings. It will do that one thing until it is destroyed ad nauseum. And I think that is something that I found very exciting to say that was written in 1938. Because that is so different from other zombie stories of the time.
It was published a couple of years after his death, sadly, so he didn't get to see how popular it was.
So he wrote it way before then, so that's the...
Yeah, I think 1934 they think he wrote it, and then sent it off to his agents, and it was published posthumously, which is kind of sad, but it's so great that we get a chance to read it.
And in a funny sort of way, kind of fitting in a way, isn't it? It's a story about zombies came to life after he died.
Yeah.
So, I know that's nothing I can say. Absolute trash. I know I've just done that. I know it was garbage what I just did, but it
was. What are we reading next week, Colin?
Oh, next week I've got a little bit. You know me. You bring in something exciting and adventurous and fast paced and everything like that. I like to bring in things that usually have dead politicians or Stuff like that. One of my favourite writers, who I think is a great writer, is H.G. Wells. I absolutely adore his stuff, and we're going to read The Door in the Wall.
The Door in the Wall.
Yes. Interesting tale. Looking forward to seeing how you're going to hate it. But also there's a thing for me is it ties in with a lot of stuff that I've done. But I've always found doors in walls fascinating. Not doors as in houses, as in, like when you're walking along and there's just like a normal wall with no roof and there's just a door in the wall, and it's about those. And it's you have a read of it, see what you think.
H.G. Wells, The Door in the Wall.
Yes.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. Yes.
I'm going to do my H.P. Lovecraft joke. Because my H.P. Lovecraft joke ties in with you. All right. And that's H.P. Lovecraft is sat in his front room, and behind him in the window, a figure shadowy in the light of the storm looms behind him. And his wife comes in and says, H.P., how's your day gone?
So yeah, please hit those subscribe buttons or hit the like buttons, because there's nowhere else in the world you're going to hear a material like that.
H.P. Lovecraft jokes advertising his next book. There you go.
Absolutely love it. Yeah. So subscribe, likes. I've got to get a copy of the story edited because we've had people asking for it, and I've my finger jammed up my backside and not been doing stuff. So I will pull my finger out and get on with stuff very, very soon. That's
great, because it's there. It's there for you people, and it can't get published until a number of people have already read it who are subscribers of this channel. So comment, make comments, ring bells, tell everybody about it. So H.G. Wells next week.
H.G. Wells next week, and one thing more. If there's anybody watching this, please, you've got a particular public domain horror story that you think you'd like us to be talking bollocks about, in that case, tell us what it is, please, and we will. We will quite happily. We will read anything, and we like stuff we've not read before as well, which is great. Yeah. We love the fact, even if it's not the stuff that we'd read, it force ourselves to read things. That's the idea. Absolutely, yeah. Brilliant. So subscribe, like. Thank you so much for your time this evening, guys. Yeah. Right. Bye now. Bye. Bye.